It was supposed to be a calm, uneventful Saturday morning. The sun had just climbed high enough to cast long golden beams across our cul-de-sac, the kind of morning where you could almost forget the troubles of the world. My wife stood in the driveway watering her flower beds, humming softly to herself, while our younger kids pedaled circles on their bikes, laughing as their tires rattled against the pavement. Inside the house, I was making coffee, savoring the aroma, when a sound tore through the air like an explosion. The unmistakable roar of a revving engine screamed down our normally quiet street. Before I could even step outside, a white Chevrolet pickup came hurtling toward our home. In a split second, it veered straight into our garage, smashing through the door with a deafening crash. Wood splintered like toothpicks, bricks cracked and flew across the yard, and the ground itself seemed to tremble. My wife dropped the hose, screaming in shock as the kids froze mid-pedal, their faces pale with fear. The truck's engine sputtered and died, smoke curling from the hood. Then, as the dust cleared, two towering men in black shirts climbed out. Across their chests, in bold white letters, were the letters, HOA. They weren't familiar faces from the neighborhood association. These men were strangers, with muscles bulging and scowls carved deep into their expressions. One of them barked, "This property is in violation. We're taking it down." My mind spun in disbelief. Who rams a family garage in broad daylight? I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with trembling hands. But before I could explain the situation, I realized something chilling. The men weren't just here to intimidate us. They intended to take everything by force. Before I could process the wreckage of my garage or the insane accusations coming from those so-called HOA enforcers, a sharp metallic sound echoed behind me. The distinct clack of a magazine being locked into place. I turned, and there he was, my 16-year-old son, standing in the doorway like he had been waiting for this very moment. He wasn't trembling, he wasn't confused, he was steady. Dressed in his tactical body armor vest, dark jeans, and gloves, he looked nothing like the boy I saw hunched over his textbooks just the night before. Slung across his chest was his AK-74, a rifle he had learned to handle responsibly under my supervision at the range. For years, I had thought his obsession with preparedness, airsoft drills, tactical practice, late-night YouTube survival videos, was just a teenage phase. But now, in the chaos of that morning, it all made sense. He stepped forward, each boot crunching over broken wood and shattered glass, and raised his voice with a command that startled even me. "Step away from my family. Now." The two men froze. Their arrogance faltered as they saw the fire in his eyes. These weren't the eyes of a scared kid, they were the eyes of someone determined to defend his home at any cost. My wife pulled the younger kids behind her, but I couldn't take my eyes off my son. The weight of the situation pressed heavy on my chest, yet in that moment, I felt something I never expected, pride. The fake HOA thugs tried to laugh it off, but their nervous glances betrayed them. My son didn't flinch, didn't lower his weapon. He stood tall, a wall of resolve between us and danger. And for the first time that day, I believed we might actually make it through this. The air outside grew tense, thick with silence except for the faint creak of our broken garage door swaying in the wind. My son stood firm, the AK-74 steady in his hands, his body armor catching the sunlight. Across from him, the two fake HOA enforcers paced like caged wolves, their heavy boots crunching debris as they tried to regain control of the situation. "You don't know who you're dealing with, kid," one of them snarled, flexing his arms in a show of intimidation. But his voice cracked just enough to reveal his doubt. The other man pointed toward the house and barked, "This structure is condemned. Move aside before we move you." My son didn't budge. His voice was calm, low, and commanding, almost startlingly adult. "You've already committed trespassing and property destruction. Deputies are on their way. Take one more step and you'll regret it." Neighbors began to gather along the sidewalks, their phones raised, recording every moment. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Nobody had ever seen anything like this in our peaceful community. Some gasped in shock at the rifle in my son's hands, but others nodded in approval, recognizing his courage. I stood behind him, my own heart pounding against my ribs like a war drum. I was ready to step in, but it was clear he was in control. For all their size and bravado, the two men couldn't seem to make a move. They were caught between the pressure of the crowd, the certainty of police arrival, and the iron will of a 16-year-old refusing to yield. Every second stretched longer than the last. One wrong gesture, one twitch, could ignite chaos. But my son's presence kept the balance. He wasn't just holding the line, he was the line. Just as the tension threatened to snap, the wail of police sirens pierced the air. Red and blue lights flashed down the street, bouncing off windows and washing over the shattered remains of our garage. The fake HOA men stiffened, their false confidence crumbling as 3 squad cars screeched to a stop in front of our house. "Hands where we can see them," an officer shouted, guns drawn as they fanned out across the lawn. My son, without hesitation, did exactly what we had practiced at the range. He lowered his rifle, placed it carefully on the driveway, and raised his hands high. He wasn't reckless, he was responsible, and I could see a flicker of respect in the officers' eyes as they moved past him. The imposters weren't so smooth. They tried yelling, insisting they had authority from the homeowners association, and that we were in violation. But their story fell apart fast. The deputies checked their IDs, none matched, none legitimate. One didn't even carry a driver's license. Their truck had no official markings, no paperwork, and no backing from any real HOA. It was all a front, a twisted intimidation scheme. Neighbors shouted from the sidewalks, calling out what they had seen, offering video evidence. The officers cuffed the men on the spot, listing off charges: trespassing, destruction of property, impersonating officials, reckless endangerment. One deputy even shook his head in disbelief. "In all my years, I've never seen something this brazen." Then he turned to my son, still standing tall despite the adrenaline draining from his face. "Kid," the officer said, "you showed more composure than most adults I know." My son just nodded, saying nothing, but I could see it, the mix of pride, relief, and the weight of what he just carried on his young shoulders. By the time the last police cruiser pulled away, the neighborhood was buzzing with voices, flashing phone cameras, and shaken laughter. Our garage stood in ruins, splintered wood, bent metal, and shards of glass scattered across the driveway. But the real focus wasn't on the wreckage, it was on my son, who still sat quietly on the porch steps, body armor strapped on, his hands resting on his knees. The adrenaline had drained out of him, leaving behind a pale but steady calm. I sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You protected us today," I said softly. He didn't respond right away, just stared at the blinking lights fading in the distance. Finally, he muttered, "I just did what needed to be done." Neighbors came over one by one. Some with pats on the back, others offering food, even hugs. Videos of the standoff were already spreading online, filling local Facebook groups and TikTok feeds with captions like, "Teen stands up to fake HOA thugs," and, "16 and fearless." Within hours, he was being called a hero. Later that evening, as we boarded up the garage, a news crew showed up, cameras rolling. My son looked uncomfortable with the attention, but the pride in his eyes couldn't be hidden. The deputy from earlier returned to check on us, telling him, "Son, what you did took guts. Not everyone could have stood their ground like that." That night, sitting around the dinner table, the events of the day replayed in my head like a movie. It could have ended so differently: disaster, tragedy, loss. Instead, because of one boy's courage, it ended with justice served and a family safe. He wasn't just my son anymore. That day, he became the protector of our home.